I came out here. My name is Christopher Bollyn from American Free Press. I write for American Free Press in Washington, D.C., and I came from Illinois. I came out on the Mormon Trail, practically. We drove with my family out through Des Moines, Iowa, Nebraska. I was staying in Des Moines, Iowa with Dr. Ann Blake Tracy, who is from Salt Lake City and wrote one of the best books on antidepressant medications. And from her Mormon house in Des Moines, I followed the Mormon Trail, came out here, visited a 9/11 widow on the way, Ellen Mariani, who has the first lawsuit filed against United Airlines for the wrongful death of her husband, Neil Mariani, who was on Flight 175, wherever that wound up. I'm very happy to be here in Salt Lake. It was worth the long drive. I'm very glad to be in a city where you have an outspoken mayor, Rocky Anderson, who opened up both barrels on the Bush administration. One thing I share in common with Rocky Anderson is that we both believe that these disastrous and costly wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are illegal. That is something most American people have not appreciated, that these wars are illegal. That is to say, they are as illegal as Israel's aggression of Lebanon. Is an act of aggression that we have perpetrated on the Iraqi people. There is no reason for American boys and girls to be in Iraq, slaying the people of Iraq, or to put their lives on the line and get themselves killed, as is happening in greater numbers. From Rocky's speech that he gave here about 10 days ago, I just want to give one brief quote. This is about the media. I'm from the media. I write for the media. I deal in the media. The First Amendment means a lot to me. Rocky Anderson said, "We are here today to insist that our news media live up to its sacred responsibility to ascertain and report the truth, rather than acting like nothing more than a bulletin board for the lies and propaganda of a manipulative, dishonest federal government." We have been getting just about everything but the truth on matters of life and death. And that's what Rocky Anderson said here 10 days ago or so. And he went on to say, had the American people known we were being lied to, had President Bush informed us that the documents were forged and that he had no other basis for his claim, had our nation's media done its job, rather than slavishly repeating to us the lies being fed to it by the Bush administration, our nation may well not have allowed the commencement of this outrageous, illegal, unjustified war. Well, that's what he said, and I'm glad to be in the same city where that man is the mayor. But Rocky, Your Honor, the lies go much deeper than that. Iraq is just the tip of the iceberg. There's Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan was also foisted on a pack of lies. Then the most recent conflict in Lebanon, when Israel bombed that country for 30 days. And then the seminal event behind this so-called war on terror, 9/11, is nothing but a pack of lies. The lies of Lebanon, that's the most recent outrage. I'll just be very brief with this. The two most fundamental lies about that, as a journalist, I know about them. The first is that the Israeli soldiers were kidnapped in Israel. Anybody who reads the Newswire reports from July 12th will find Associated Press, UPI, Agence French Press, and the Deutsche Presseagentur. There are at least 15 stories based on Lebanese police reports that the two Israeli soldiers were captured in Lebanon after they had infiltrated with a mission into a village called Aita al-Shab, 2 miles inside of Lebanon. That changes everything. That means that the war that Israel waged against Lebanon was a pre-planned provocation started by Israel. And then the second one is the massacre at Cana. Cana was massacred again, the people of Cana. This is where Jesus changed the water into wine in Galilee, which is North Galilee is in Lebanon. When Jesus changed the water into wine, that's the village. They were massacred under Shimon Peres in 1996 when they killed 120 people inside of the United Nations Fiji battalion camp there. Now this time, again, the Israelis bombed the house and killed scores of people, we don't know, 40, 30, mostly children, women and children of two families that were huddled in the basement of that building. And the Israelis said, well, there were missiles being fired from nearby that building. But 2 days later, the Israeli media reported that the Israeli army had found that there were no missiles had been fired from anywhere in Cana for the entire day before the bombing. I'll just give you an idea of the kind of lies that most Americans read in their daily paper, hear in their daily news programs every day of the week. And this is the reason why there are not 100,000 people here, because unfortunately our fellow citizens are deceived by the mainstream media, and they've been lulled into complacency. There is a sense of urgency. There is a moment of truth here, and there should be 100,000 people here. Now, the U.S. is waging illegal and immoral wars all across the Middle East and Central Asia, while here at home, a domestic police state has been set up under the guise of Homeland Security. You might not know this, but every local police department in the United States corresponds with the Department of Homeland Security. And about 3 weeks ago, 3 Homeland Security thugs came to my house, dressed in body armor with their weapons, assaulted me in front of my wife and my daughter, and tasered me on my front lawn. And I have to turn around and go back to Illinois because I have to go to court on Wednesday because I have been charged with resisting arrest and aggravated assault. If you're interested in knowing more about this Homeland Security assault that occurred at my house, stop at that first table over there, American Free Press. They've got some papers and some information, and you can find out a bit more about that. Now, Homeland Security. Homeland Security corresponds with every single police department in this nation. That's something to think about. That is a domestic police state. It is here. It is now. It is real. It's not coming in a few years. It's now. And you know that the Secretary of Homeland Security is a man named Michael Sheratov. Michael Sheratov is a cabinet secretary of Homeland Security. He's also an Israeli. He's an Israeli national. His mother was also one of the first Mossad agents in the state of Israel. In 1948, she married an American rabbi from New York, Mr. Sheratov, and Michael Sheratov was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey in 1952. He doesn't want to talk about his childhood, however. He won't talk with the newspapers in New Jersey about his childhood. You know why? Because his childhood was spent in Israel. Now, this is the man, Michael Sheratov. You see him on TV. He's a very gaunt-looking man. This is the man who oversees Homeland Security, the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, that runs the airports, that takes away your water and your burn ointments. He also sits on top of he's in charge of the Secret Service. So he's in charge of the Palace Guard for George Bush. He's also in charge of the new Immigration and Naturalization Service. He's in charge of the decisions made on the border, who comes in, who doesn't come in. And he's also in charge of the Coast Guard. So you see, this Israeli fellow has quite a bit of control in this country. Now, do you know who was in charge of passenger screening and security at Boston's Logan Airport on 9/11? It was an Israeli company called Huntley USA. Huntley USA is owned by an Israeli company called ICTS, stands for International Consultants on Targeted Security. And it is a company run by a man named Menachem Atzmon. Menachem Atzmon is a co-defendant of the current Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert. They were partners in crime. Ehud Olmert is the Prime Minister. His treasurer, the treasurer of his campaigns in Israel, was Menachem Atzmon. Menachem Atzmon is a convicted felon in the state of Israel. Yet this was the man who oversaw security at Boston's Logan Airport on 9/11. And guess what Congress did after 9/11? They gave complete exoneration, protection for those 3 foreign security companies that checked the passengers on 9/11. The 3 companies, Argent Bright, Globe, and Huntley, are all exempt from any investigation into 9/11. This is why people like Ellen Mariani and every other 9/11 relative, not a single case has gone before a court. Not a single case has gone to trial. While that Moussaoui fella who was up in jail in Minnesota, he got his day in court in Alexandria, Virginia. Not a single relative from 9/11 has had their day in court. after 5 full years. That's a shame. But to understand that, you have to read what I've written about 9/11. You have to read about these things. The best way to do it is take my name and put it in a Google search, Christopher Bollyn, Israeli, 9/11. You'll find out all that. Because there's a whole lot there, much more than I can get into in a day of talking. So how did this happen? How did this criminal gang take over our government? These Gadianton robbers, if you will. How did these people take over our country? I can tell you they did it in two ways. By exploiting two myths that Americans hold dear to their hearts. Most Americans believe that we have open and honest elections and that our votes really count. They believe we have fair elections. Most Americans believe that. Although I can ask you, when was the last time you saw any vote being counted in any polling place in this country? I can tell you it's been at least 30 years. The second myth they believe is that we have a free press. We don't have a free press. Nothing close to it. I want to compare the recent election they had down there, the presidential election they had in Mexico, with the one we had in 2004, because they're very, very similar. Very close race, you know, one of those 50% races, right? Now, the Mexicans that supported Obrador, the former mayor of Mexico City, they knew they'd been cheated. They knew they'd been robbed. So Obrador didn't give up. He said he wanted a vote count, and he had thousands of protesters who, for 2 months, sat out there and had a massive protest in Mexico City. What did we have in 2004 when we faced the exact same situation? We had a fellow Skull and Bones member named John Forbes Carey who conceded defeat before the votes were even counted in Ohio. He said, well, that's what he did. He and Edwards both conceded defeat before the votes had even been counted in Ohio, the final swing state. And George Bush won the election in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Florida, the three swing states, by a statistical probability. Now that's a very big county. It's millions of people. It's the whole city of Chicago and the suburbs. I went in the back room and I poked around and found out who was counting the votes. The entire election was being run by a bunch of 30-year-old Venezuelan guys. Believe me. And this company called Sequoia, which counts the votes for 40 million Americans, is a Venezuelan shell company. They say it's run by a couple 32-year-old guys from Venezuela, but it's not. There's another company offshore in the British, or those Netherlands Antilles, in Curaçao, that is the owner. Then there's another company in Holland, in Amsterdam, that is the parent company. We have no idea who owns Sequoia. It could be owned by the Israelis. It could be run by the Mossad, which I think it is. Or it could be run by anybody. We have no idea. The same goes for ES&S in Omaha, Nebraska, and Diebold in Ohio. All we know about Diebold and ES&S is that they're run by a couple of brothers named Yarosevich. So what I'm saying here is, well, like Jackie Kennedy said, the late and great First Lady of this country, she said, we should all do something to right the wrongs we see, and not just complain about them. We owe that to our country. So, I agree with her. Well, what do? If we accept that foreign and private companies, extremely secretive companies, are allowed to run our elections and count our votes without any citizen oversight whatsoever, then we should no longer pretend that we live in a constitutional republic in which we have a democratic franchise through the electing of our representatives. Our elections are a sham. When we allow such fraudulent elections to occur in this country, then we shouldn't be surprised when our governments, local governments, state governments, county governments, and federal government positions are taken over by a bunch of criminals. As the Mormons have been warned, we are living in times in which the Gadianton robbers have taken over. And the Book of Mormon gives you a warning about that. It's happened before, and it's happened now. In that sense, you should consider yourselves forewarned. So how do we rectify this dismal situation that we find our country in without going through chaotic and bloody revolution? There is a peaceful way that we can protect and recover our constitutional republic. And to do so, we must do one thing. We must demand that our elections are open and honest as they were before, with paper ballots that are counted by hand in each polling station in front of the public. This is the way they do it in Europe. This is the way they do it in France. In Europe, I've watched. Every citizen can watch how the votes are counted. That's the only way. That's the sine qua non. Without that, there is no democracy. There's no democratic franchise. The elections are fraudulent. Was it Stalin who said, "He who casts the vote decides nothing. He who counts the votes decides everything"? The second myth is that we don't have a free press. We don't. As my paper says, the media is the enemy. It might sound strange coming from a newspaper person, but I write for a very small independent newspaper in Washington, D.C. We're a nationally read paper. And I'm talking about the mainstream media. I'm talking about the mass media in this country. The print, the radio, the TV, even the electronic media is controlled by a small group of people, media moguls, and corporations dedicated to big business, big oil, weapons, money, and war. I've written a lot about depleted uranium. That's another subject that I've done a lot of work on, and that's something that the mainstream media won't touch at all. Nobody should touch it, but they won't even talk about it. The controlled media is biased against peace and prosperity. In terms of foreign and trade policy, you've heard today, the mass media is clearly biased in favor of Zionism, that is the state of Israel, supporting the state of Israel, and it's against the indigenous people of the Middle East, Egyptians, Jordanians, Palestinians, Lebanese, what have you. The same media in this country is owned and led by Zionists and globalists who are free traders. They're opposed to national sovereignty, and they're opposed to the prosperity of middle America. As Mayor Anderson said on August 30th here, he said the media has acted like a bulletin board for the lies and propaganda of the manipulative and dishonest federal government. Yes, through treachery and deception from the media, our nation and constitutional republic has been taken into illegal wars based on a series of lies and fabrications. We now know that the Senate Intelligence Committee said yesterday that there was absolutely no evidence that Saddam Hussein or Iraq was in any way affiliated with Al-Qaeda or any of the terrorism of 9/11. So why are Americans killing Iraqis and Afghanis and being killed in far-off countries, which most Americans can't even locate on the map? The war on terror is an Israeli construct that was first pushed by a man named Benjamin Netanyahu in 1986. It's a phony construct if ever there was one. And this war on terror is based on the hoax, I'll call it the hoax of 9/11. Because 9/11 is an unsolved crime, full stop, which has been used to create insecurity among the American population and install a police state throughout the nation. And it kickstarted the war on terror. I have worked on and investigated 9/11 since that day. I happened to be in New York, passing through New York with my family on September 11th, and could not go to Washington. Then I had to flee back through Pennsylvania, went by Shanksville, where we often stay. I've been to those places, I've looked at these things, I've talked to the people, and I can tell you that everything the government has put out in their reports, the NIST report, the 9/11 Commission, is nothing but a very cleverly packaged of lies. The building reports, the 9/11 Commission, the NIST report. In 2002, for example, I found out that there was a great deal of molten metal seen at the World Trade Center. When I spoke to the men that did the excavation of that debris, Mr. Tully and Mr. Loiseau, when they got down to the very bottom basement level, when they got down to the bedrock of Manhattan, you know what they found? They found big pools of molten metal. They called it molten steel. Still in the molten state. 4 or 5 weeks after the event, after the site had been sprayed with water continuously. As we know, these fires were cooking for the entire time. Now, what caused that molten metal at the World Trade Center? Well, I got a call about a year and a half ago from a professor at Provo at BYU, a man named Stephen Jones. Stephen Jones is an amazing man. He wrote to me, called me, asked me, where did I hear about this molten metal? Who told me? What did they tell me exactly? I wrote back and told him exactly what I had been told by Mr. Tully and Mr. Loiseau of Controlled Demolition Incorporated. A lot of people in the 9/11 movement didn't like what I had said. They didn't agree that molten metal could exist in a molten state for 5 weeks because there's no explanation for it. There's no way that it can be explained in a very easy sense. I came out and saw Professor Jones in BYU. I saw him in March. I saw him again in June this year. I've been there a couple times talking to him. And I've attended his classes. And I just came into Provo yesterday afternoon and was dismayed to find out that the elders at BYU have put this excellent professor who's taught there for 21 years on paid leave. I submit to you that Professor Jones is our Galilei of today. He is facing an inquisition because he challenges the doctrine of the Bush administration that says that 2 hijacked planes with Arabs crashed into the World Trade Center and caused those mighty towers to collapse. One of the things that Professor Jones and I have looked at a great deal was before the South Tower fell. Before the first tower fell, before the South Tower fell, there were massive amounts of molten metal pouring off the 81st floor on the east corner of that building. There is no explanation for that. I know Professor Jones is a solid scientist, and I stand by him. And the elders at BYU, the powers that be at BYU, have to explain why they are treating this man as they are after 21 years of impeccable research and teaching at BYU. And I want to find out who's behind the decision at BYU, because I don't think that it's the dean at BYU. Now, the NIST report is very important. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They came out with about a 50,000-page report on 2 CDs. And I've looked at it a great deal because it deals with the fires at the World Trade Center. And you know what? They have no explanation for the molten metal at the World Trade Center. They cannot explain it. They talk about it. They talk about the pressure pulse that followed by a puff of white smoke, which was then followed by gushing molten metal. Now Professor Jones got pieces of that molten metal that's hardened, and he tested them, and he found that that was in fact molten iron with traces of thermite. My friends, Salt Lake City and Provo is right in the middle of the most important 9/11 research that's being done, and Professor Jones is being crucified for what he found out, and his courageousness to stand up and say the truth about what happened to those towers. Likewise, the FBI, we know, has confiscated all of the crucial evidence from the Pentagon, from other places. The FBI took over every crash site. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the FBI told Wally Miller, the local coroner, Mr. Miller, you go home for a couple weeks, we'll take care of this. We'll call you back in a couple weeks. At the Pentagon, the FBI took over the crash site, kept everybody out. For about 3 weeks, they cleaned the place, scoured it, and then they put plywood around the areas they didn't want the engineers to go. Then they invited some engineers to come for 2 hours and walk around and take pictures and write a report. My friends, the FBI, under the directorship of Michael Sheratov at the time, is the agency that has concealed the truth about 9/11. So you can understand when I'm writing stories about the FBI's involvement in 9/11, when I was a little bit worried when I found that 2 local people who came to my house on a regular basis last summer were informing the FBI on my comings and goings. So my family went to Europe. We only came back to my house in July this year. We were only in the house for about 1 or 2 weeks before I had this run-in with these Homeland Security thugs in my driveway. But it's the FBI under the command of Michael Sheratov, the son of an Israeli Mossad agent, who oversaw the covering up of the truth of 9/11. Michael Sheratov also released the hundreds of Israeli agents who were pretending to be moving men who had been caught photographing and celebrating the attacks on the World Trade Center in New Jersey. After that initial group was caught, they were caught all over the country. They always fit the same modus operandi. They were driving a moving van. The van tested positive for explosives. They had box knives, 2 passports, and they were staking out some sensitive military location. All of these people and the art students that were following those Arabs around for years, all of them were sent home on visa violations by Michael Sheratov. Michael Sheratov was at the year 2001. He was the Assistant Attorney General in charge of Criminal Division at the Department of Justice. We had a brand new director of FBI, John Mueller, and Mr. Mueller was only on the job 5 days when 9/11 happened. He reports to Sheratov. Michael Sheratov also wrote the Patriot Act, along with his Vietnamese colleague at the Department of Justice. Michael Sheratov's also the one who presented the list, compiled the list of the 19 Arabs. The only problem is about half of those guys are still alive. You know, the guys that were supposed to be piloting the planes, if you watch the movies like Flight 93, well, 7 of those 19 Arabs are still alive. The only thing that happened to them is that their passports were stolen when they were in the United States, a year or so before. And Michael Sheratov is now the head of Homeland Security and head of all those agencies I told you about before. Michael Sheratov is just one of many key Zionist players, Israeli and American, who are at the center of the 9/11 crime and at the covering up of that 9/11 crime. The war on terror is a phony Zionist construction, and the people behind it are Zionists, Israelis, and Americans who have long planned the balkanization of the Middle East, the conquest of the oil lands of the Middle East, and the redrawing of the map. And our American foot soldiers over there are just their pawns. This is why not a single 9/11 relatives case has gone before a trial. They've all been in the courtroom of Mr. Alvin K. Hellerstein in the South District of New York City. Hellerstein is another Zionist, and he is completely in charge of every 9/11 case. And he wants one of those people that are 9/11 relatives, he wants them medicated. He wants them on Prozac, Zoloft. And then he wants them to sign and take the fund, so that not a single 9/11 relative ever gets their day in court. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can ask them. Appreciate it. It's been nice to be with you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take an opportunity here in case you think that everything you've heard about 9/11 is far different and you'd like to ask a question or two. If you'll just come right up here and you have a question, a great opportunity. We'd like to have your input here. Christopher Bollyn, I have a question. You travel everywhere. Tell us where you've been just maybe in the last couple of years, and then I'd like to know if you're a linguist. Do you know other languages?
Well, yeah, thank you. My family and I, we spent a lot of time in Europe. My wife is from Estonia and Sweden. We've lived in Germany, and in doing my Bilderberg work, I go to Bilderberg meetings and things like that. I've had altercations with the police before, but never anything so brutal. What happened to me at my own house 3 weeks ago. And then we were in Venezuela. I was down there in March of this year. And then since then I've been traveling the western states. And we speak a few languages. Sure, we speak some German and Scandinavian and Spanish, things like that.
Thank you for your approach to going to the scene of the crime. You went and brought back to a lot of readers of American Free Press your analysis, your investigation of the people who cleaned up 9/11. And like I say, we have learned this week that the administration says, yeah, we do take a few people and put them in secret prisons. Explain to the citizens here extraordinary rendition.
Oh, that's a very good question. Extraordinary rendition is something I know a bit about. It's when the CIA or the FBI go to a country like Sweden and they say, we're interested in getting this fella and that fella. And then they go and they kidnap this person off the street and take him to an airport, chain him up, and send him to a country like Egypt or Syria where that person will be tortured to confess. Now, this has been going on. Bill Clinton passed this, made this possible under an executive order, I think, in 1993. I know personally about 12 people who have been kidnapped from their hospital beds in 1994 from the Estonia wreck. And I went to some places where these people are held. George Bush said last week that, yes, we do have these bases. Well, I've been to a couple of them. One is in Germany, in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Another one is in Hungary, in a place called Kaposvár. And yes, it's true. They have these bases across Europe where people have been kidnapped without any due process and flown through European countries and tortured, terribly tortured. You know, it's interesting that now the United States has a new field manual for the Army that says that the troops in the field can no longer deprive a prisoner of water or torture them with electric shock. But they can do this to American citizens. They did it to me at my house 3 weeks ago. First they beat me up, tackled me on the lawn, handcuffed me, then they tasered me with 50,000 volts. Then they took me to jail. In a cell there was no water. No water came from the well, from the spigot. And I said, I need some water, please. And they said, drink from the toilet. I thought, do they treat everybody like this? But no, they don't treat everybody like this. But if you're a journalist who writes and exposes the truth and gets to the bottom of these things, they treat you like that here.
A question has been asked, what will happen? What about your community? What about your neighbors? And do you think you'll get a fair deal in court?
That's a good question. It's Cook County, after all. Cook County is one of the most corrupt counties in the nation. And it's a town called Hoffman Estates where there's a history of doing this kind of thing. In Chicago, they do torture people. And I'm going up there. I'm being arraigned. And my newspaper has collected some legal fund to help me. I have to defend these charges. And then I think I owe it to my country and to the people that we pursue a civil case against the police for tasering people who are restrained and torturing them in front of their family. If I don't do it, who will?
Would you say the taser was a non-lethal weapon?
Another good question. A taser is not a non-lethal weapon. Last count was 190 Americans and Canadians have been killed by this thing. It's a small gun that police carry on their shoulder and their hip. And it can shoot barbs at a person from something like 20 feet away. And the electrodes go into your skin. Then every time they push the trigger, you get 50,000 volt. Now, the Europeans consider this to be a weapon of torture. The British said there should be a global ban on these things. But there are 7,000 police departments in the United States that use this on a daily basis. And most people are actually tasered while they are restrained. That is, it's a tool of compliance by the police. If they don't like you, if you're a little bit bigger than they are, if you're not complying with their wishes, they will zap you with this evil thing. It should be banned. It's cruel and inhuman treatment.
My name's Fred Money, and I've rode the bicycle across the United States twice, and I've been in all kinds of papers and national feeds. And the reason I was there is because, like what you're here for now, is that the papers are saying that there's nothing, they're not getting the truth from the mass media. It wasn't me that was putting the paper, it was that they wanted somebody to have a soapbox to stand on to say what was really going on out there. There's two questions I'm going to put to you of what's going on, because I think I'm up there with on number one hit list with the government as you are, Mr. Bollyn. I went by your paper twice when I was in D.C. But I have right here, which you can look at and verify, it's a thing from Google showing that I was in front of the city from 99 up to September the 4th of 2001, saying there was going to be a terrorist attack here because the terrorists would not pass up the Olympics, and there was no security out at this airport. Why wasn't there no security at this airport, and how did this town get the Olympics without there being proper security at the airport? Second is this sheet that comes up on Google. I got it while I was over in Colorado at the Aspen Library. I come over here at the university and it won't come up. And in the last few days, I've had to email some people, and each time I call them, it comes back that they got it, but yet when I call them, they say they haven't received it. But would you want to work, you and I work together more to talk about some of this stuff, and I can help you on some of your stuff? Sure. So that's all. Sure.
Okay.
Another question that I picked up from walking around, Will we ever get the real truth on 9/11 coming out? What about the Scholars for Truth now that it's been such an extraordinary week for Dr. Jones? Dr. Fetzer was on the air with me yesterday, got an early morning call from Dr. Fetzer, absolutely devastated that this has taken place. How do we go forward?
Well, I think it's actually a good thing. I think it's a good thing when these police attacks happen like happened to me in my house, and I think it's a good thing. There's a blessing in disguise when they do such a thing to Professor Jones, because it only brings attention to him. It shows that he is truly a Galileo, that the media in this country and the government in this country and his critics don't address his science. They kill the messenger. Now he's been teaching at BYU for 21 years. I've been to his classes. He did a thermite reaction in his class. This is how the thermite is what he says cut those steel columns that held up the World Trade Center. You have to understand that those two towers would not have collapsed if the 47 central columns of each tower weren't cut. Those were box columns about as big as this podium, with 4 inches of steel on each wall. Unless those box columns were cut, the buildings wouldn't fall. So the big question has always been, what happened to the core columns of the World Trade Center? Professor Jones shows that it was a thermite reaction. That thermite, when that aluminum powder and that ferrous oxide, when they react, it's an intense reaction, exothermic, creates incredible heat. And the result is a white smoke, which is the aluminum oxide, white smoke, and molten iron. And molten iron is exactly what we found in the bottom of the World Trade Center. There is no way that a burning airplane or hydrocarbon or kerosene could generate anywhere near that temperature, that heat. My friends, Professor Jones down the street in Provo has proven what happened to the World Trade Center. The cat is out of the bag. I wrote an open letter to the World Trade Center investigators in 2002, and I said the cat's out of the bag. We know those buildings were exploded. We know that there were massive explosions in the basement. What else explains the 2.1 and 2.3 magnitude earthquakes that occurred at the beginning of each tower's collapse? We solved it. We know what happened. And the government has built this stone wall of lies and fabrication to cover the truth. The truth is out. It's coming out all the time. But there's one thing I have to let you know. That not everyone who says they're a 9/11 investigator is on the side of truth. I know even some of the people who are in the Scholars for Truth organization have attacked Professor Jones recently. Morgan Reynolds, a former Bush administration person, has written a big letter about it. Professor Jones' credentials are impeccable, and his science is absolutely sound. And the people of Utah and Provo and Salt Lake City should stand behind this man. He's a hero of our time.
Another question. Mr. Bollyn, you referenced the Bilderberger. So we have a question wanting to have you enlarge a little bit about them, who they might be, as you have investigated them.
Yeah, my first job with American Free Press, that was called the Spotlight, was to go to the Bilderberg conference in Belgium. And I'd heard about this shady organization of big shots. And when I went to Belgium, I saw it was very, very true. The most intense security I've ever seen in my life, followed by the arrival of all the big shots from the world. You know, George Soros and the President of the United States and Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller, all these people. I've met a couple of them in the park. I met David Rockefeller in Paris the other year when he came walking back from the Chateau at Versailles. Now, what this is the group of very, very wealthy and powerful men that have a steering committee. And every year they bring a new group of people in, and they try to form a consensus about what they will do in the coming year. They say, this year we will do Iraq, for example. And who also attends these meetings? Very importantly, the heads of the major media. Just like at Davos in Switzerland every January. There you will find the head of Newsweek, the head of Wall Street Journal, the head of Time Magazine, the head of CNN, all whining and dining with these big powers, these financial powers, these political powers. And they're getting all their ducks in a row for what's going to happen in the coming year. And they do it every year. And it's done behind closed doors, and they're laughing at us because they set public policy behind closed doors. This is where we've lost our nation, my friends.
question I have here, and the panelists can be invited to respond as well. The question deals with Professor Jones. Do you have any idea about how he's doing? Do you know what his plans might be for the future? It's a question concerning Dr. Jones and his response.
Yes, I contacted Professor Jones yesterday in Provo. He wrote back to me, and he said that he's not willing to talk. He's not going to talk about the situation of his unpaid leave from BYU because he's under the microscope. He's being scrutinized. So as I wrote back to him, I said, I don't really want to ask you any questions. I want answers from the people at BYU. Why they have done this. This is the kind of thing they did to Galileo. That if this man shows you something scientifically that you don't agree with, you say, no, you're out of here. This is very un-American, and this is a big step backwards for science and for the truth.
I'll just read them here. If you have another 2 or 3 questions, we will take them from the audience, and we'll refer to our other guests as well. This is a question in regard to your comment about Zionists being our enemy. The question is, what about the mullahs and the followers of Islam, and about their declaring their hatred toward us and their schools where they teach their young children? Please comment.
That's a very good question. I've lived in the Middle East. I've spent a lot of time in Israel. I speak Hebrew and some Arabic. I've been to Iran, these places. I can tell you that Zionism is a very, very dangerous ideology. Zionism is an ideology created on Jewish supremacism. I've lived in Israel. I've lived there. I go there and get my visa. I always got a B visa because I'm a Christian. As a Christian, you cannot get married to an Israeli. You cannot own land in Israel. You are basically persona non grata. And this ideology that a race of people has exclusive domain and privileges over all others, to me, this is very un-American. Furthermore, Zionism is the problem. Zionism is the cause of the conflicts in the region. If you haven't learned that by now, if you haven't seen that from what happened in Lebanon in July, or what's happened in the Gaza Strip, those people of the Gaza Strip that are living in the Gaza Strip that are being attacked every day, they are not from Gaza. Most of those people are the original inhabitants of places like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and Yaffo. And they were displaced in 1948 and have been living as refugees in Gaza ever since. The people of the Holy Land are Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And there is not one group that has the right to lord over the others. Now, as about the mullahs and things like that, there are extremist elements in every religion, so you can find an extremist anywhere. Like the Al-Qaeda people, whoever these are. One thing you have to understand is that a great deal of this so-called terrorism that's happening in Iraq today is not Iraqi. Those car bombs that are going off every day are not Iraqi. Do you not remember when they caught those 2 British agents who drove by? They drove by a protest like this one, and they machine gunned the people in Basra, where the British are in power, right? Well, the British police, the Iraqi police chased down this car. And they caught this car. And there were 2 guys all wrapped up with the turbans, black turbans. They said, Al-Mahdi fighters, right? Well, they unwrapped the black turbans, and what did they find? 2 British SAS men. And these men were taken to a prison. This happened about in February last year. They were taken to a prison. And the British got right on it. They said, you let these guys go. They sent down a very high-powered diplomatic mission. You let these 2 guys out of that jail. Their car was full of explosives. That's true. They were machine gunning people in the street. That's true. But let them go. They're British. Do you see what I'm getting at? The terrorism. That car was full of explosives for one reason. They were going to take it someplace and park it and blow it up. And what we're hearing from Iraq, most of the terrorism, it's not suicide bombers. It's a truck like that, Constitution Party truck like that. Drives up someplace, somebody leaves it, and it blows up in a market. This is terrorism for the sake of one thing. The British, the Americans, and the Israelis have a plan. That plan is to break up Iraq into 3 sections. To break up Iran. Iran, they only want one thing, my friends. They want that little province in the southeast next to Basra called Ahwaz. They want Ahwaz because that's where 90% of Iran's oil is. And they want to create a little Shiite country, Basra and Ahwaz. That's where all the oil is. That's all they want.
I'm just wondering how Chris fits the Zionists into the CFR and the globalists. What the relationship, who's driving who?
Now that's a very good question. The Zionist dream, the Zionist plot, has always had very high-level sponsors. The British have been in it from the very beginning. The so-called British millenariist movement. These are the people who thought that, you know, they have to reconstruct the Jewish kingdom in order for things to happen in Armageddon and whatnot. The Rothschilds have always been big supporters of Zionism. The Israeli people, by and large, are just people like Americans who have been duped into this way of thinking, have come from places like Russia and Yemen. But on the other hand, there's a very powerful force in Israel called the Mossad, called the Israeli intelligence. I want to tell you one story about what they do. We know that in 1967 they bombed an American ship, USS Liberty, killed 34 Americans, and tried to blame it on the Egyptians. We know that they blew up the King David Hotel. That was Menachem Begin did that. But look at what the terrorism they do to their own people. In 1948, when Mrs. Sheratov, Mrs. Levia Eisen was her name. She's Mr. Sheratov's mom. She's one of the first Mossad agents. She ran something called Operation Magic Carpet. And what they did is that they were taking the Jews from Yemen, from way down south in the Saudi Peninsula, and they were taking them on secret flights from Yemen to Israel, because Israel needs people. They needed people. And so to get people, what did they also do? Operation Magic Carpet. They sent Mossad agents to Baghdad. And you know what they did in Baghdad? They blew up synagogues. They put bombs in Jewish synagogues in Baghdad for one reason: to scare the Iraqi Jews and make them leave Iraq and go to Israel. And they've done it time and time again. You see? This is what we call false flag terrorism. When a country or an agency commits an act of terror with the intention of having the blame affixed to their enemy. That is what 9/11 was. But now, after this recent incident, my elbow is fractured, this elbow is mending, and I was tasered. For 10 days, I was feeling very, very ill. I don't want to run from this country, but I have to think about my safety. We are no longer safe in my hometown. We're not safe in my house. There are times when I do go to Europe or go someplace else simply because I feel safer there.